This morning we started taking a look at Genesis chapter 6, and I know some of y'all weren't here for that, but we had a rather sobering look at the antediluvian people, the people who lived before the flood, and the way that they had become totally corrupted. And we looked at how Satan was able to accomplish that and how he's able to corrupt good people, take them from serving God, and basically destroy that inside of us. And he was able to take them from being God-fearing good people into being the wicked people that God had to destroy. We saw that because we are made of flesh and we have these natural desires, we can't just take ourselves out of this fleshly body, and we're kind of stuck with that. And we're going to deal with temptation. And that's just kind of the way that is. And so God gave those natural desires to us, but Satan is able to corrupt us with them. On top of that, Satan uses time to his advantage, knowing that he can eat away and chip away at us over time until we give in. And since the flood, God has graciously shortened our lifespans so that we don't have to deal with everything quite so long. And then Satan will get to our hearts by using those who are close to us, those who love us, not necessarily they love us, but the people whom we love, especially our family, especially those who are close to us, to tempt us and to draw us away from God. And these tactics worked for Satan then, they work for him now, and in fact, he's just gotten better at using them to get to us. And in Genesis 6, we see that Satan was able to corrupt the entire world except for one man. That man was Noah. This man, Noah, stood out because he was different. He was God-fearing. He was righteous. And we want to look at tonight what it was that made him different. How was his life so distinct? How was he different? Why was he different? And importantly, how can we be different in the same way? So return with me to Genesis chapter 6. We read verses 1 through 8 this morning. We're going to pick up there in verse 9 and go to the end of the chapter. So Genesis 6, verses 9 through 22. It says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among those in his generations. Noah walked with God. And Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms, and you shall cover it inside and out with pitch. Now this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark and complete it to 1 cubit from the top. Set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. As for me, behold, I am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall breathe its last. But I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible and gather it to yourself, and it shall be for food for you and for them. Thus Noah did. According to all that God had commanded him, so he did. Okay. Most of that is not about Noah himself. Most of that is God giving this description of how to build the ark and all the details and the process itself. But there's enough here. There's enough here to learn about Noah himself. Verse 9 gives us our basic facts about Noah. It says that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among those in his generations. Now, if you look at chapter 7, verse 1, it says something similar. The Lord said to Noah, "Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this generation." It tells us that Noah's blameless righteousness that we see in chapter 6, verse 9, it comes about because he's the only one. He is the only one who is living righteously because he is committed to it. He has made that his purpose. That is all he's concerned about. That's all he cares about, is living right. He could have lived any way in the entire world. And it's actually really hard to imagine this. It's really hard for me to imagine Noah because I can't fathom it. I can't imagine what it would possibly be like for him. He could have been any way in the entire world. He could have been just like all the people surrounding him, but he chose to be different. And I want you to notice this. God does not choose Noah to be righteous. God chooses him because he is righteous. God, in that principle is a universal principle. God does not choose people to be righteous. God chooses us because we are righteous. It is our choice. He leaves that decision and that choice with us. And if we don't make that commitment ourselves, it's not going to happen. And Noah, to his extreme credit, makes that decision. And he commits to that. Now, for Noah, this had to be insanely hard. Like I said, I really cannot imagine it. Just think. Imagine a world in which every single other person in the entire world is living differently than you. We struggle, and we have a room full of people that we get to see every week who we know love God and care about God, and we study the scripture together. No, we didn't have any of that. What's interesting to me is God actually never praises Noah's family either. Now, it's possible that when God says you alone, when he's talking to Noah, that he means to include his family as well. It's possible that his family, his wife and his sons are just as righteous as he is. But it doesn't seem to me, at least from the text, that they're exceptional in any way. He stands out, at least along with his family, if not among his family as well. He's really standing alone in this. And the kind of commitment and resolve that he has is exactly what it takes to serve God when the world turns upside down. And that's really, that's most of it. That's most of what we see in this text is his commitment and his resolve. Noah was not concerned with what everyone else thought about him. If that had been the case, we wouldn't know him. But instead, as Hebrews 11 verse 7 says, Noah condemned the world by his righteous living. If you want to be like Noah, commit to righteousness. That's where it starts. You have to commit to righteousness. The next thing verse 9 says is that Noah walked with God. Now, this particular phrase, walking with God, is only ever used in Scripture of two individuals, and we've seen one of them before. It's Enoch. Noah's great-grandfather, that's chapter 5, Verse 24, Noah walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, like I said, that's the only two people, Enoch and Noah, that are ever described in this way. Now, what's interesting is, if you go back and you look at chapter 5, you see these really long lives that everyone lives, Adam lives for 930 years, Seth lives 912, Enosh 905, 910, 895, 962. Enoch only lives 365 years. Now, what's interesting about that to me is maybe Noah was inspired to live as righteously as he did because he saw the example of his great-grandfather. But the two of them could never have met. Enoch died before Noah was even born. Enoch, possibly the influence for Noah's righteous life, was a man whom he had never met. A man he had, I guarantee you, he had heard about from his father and grandfather. This is someone he knows about, someone who walked with God, who kind of set the stage, set the precedent, set the bar. That's the word I'm looking for. Set the bar for what it means to walk with God. And that is what Noah emulates. Noah emulates not a single one of the people who lived during his lifetime, but he emulates a man who lived before him. A man he could only hear about or perhaps read about. How much more true should that be of us? Do we look at those who are, earlier in chapter 6, it talks about the Nephilim being the mighty men who are of old, the men of renown. Noah does not look to those who are considered great in his time as inspiration for how he wants to live. He looks back and he knows that that kind of righteous life is what he wants to have. We should do the same. Instead of looking to celebrities or the role models of our day and time, we need to look back to the man who lived righteously, to Jesus. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, since we have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Just like Enoch would have set the example for Noah, we have a much better example than Enoch. We have Christ himself. We have the Messiah. We have God in the flesh that we can look to, and we can see his life and his example, his teachings, and we have him to emulate. He should be the model for our lives. The Hebrews writer tells us that basically he tells us to stop making excuses, to lay aside every hindrance, lay aside all the things that get in the way, and instead just focus our attention on Jesus. If we make Jesus our focus, his life, his teachings, we'll be able to make it through. And we don't have to worry about anything else. Noah walked with God because he knew that's the kind of life that he wanted to lead. It's the kind of life he knew was important and valuable and would make a difference. Walk with God if you want to be like Noah. Then, of course, after we have this description of who Noah is, it kind of sums up the details again, that the earth was corrupt before God, and he decided he was going to destroy it. But I want you to look in verse 13. Verse 13 begins with the words, "Then God said to Noah." And it continues. God speaks to Noah. It's a simple observation, but God can speak to Noah because Noah is listening for God. Noah is ready to receive whatever message it is that God has for him. I don't know if this is the first time he's ever heard from God. That could be the case. It could also be that he's had a long-standing relationship with God where they've communicated quite a bit over the years. I have no idea. I don't know what it was like at that time, whether God was frequent in his communication or whether it was more rare. I suspect it was actually a rather rare and special thing, but that's just my opinion. Regardless, Noah he's at the ready. He has his ear open. He's ready to receive the words that God has for him. In the same way that God gives him all the details, he gives him every bit of information he needs in order to build this ark. God has given to us all the knowledge that we need. I want to read a passage from 2 Peter, and I actually want you to turn to this one because this one's good. Not that the others haven't been, but I really want to look at this one. So if you have a marker, plop it there in Genesis 6. If you don't, you'll find it again. 2 Peter chapter 1. Second Peter chapter 1. 2 Peter 1, I want to read verses 3 and 4. Seeing that his divine power, God's divine power, has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness, through the full knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. For by these, his own glory and excellence, he has granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world by lust. I also really like the Christian Standard Bible rendering of that particular verse. I'm going to read that. It's very similar. Verses 3 and 4 again. His divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. By these he has given us very great and precious promises, so that through them you may share in the divine nature, escaping the corruption that is in the world because of evil desire. And what Peter is telling us here is that God has given us all the relevant tools we need. Just like God gave Noah all the information he needed to build the ark, he gave him the dimensions, he told him the correct materials, he told him the whole process, what order all the steps were going to go in. He told him that he was going to save him and what was going to happen afterward. God gave him all the information he needed. In the same way, God gives us the tools that we need. Everything that we need for life and godliness is contained, notice he says, in the full knowledge or the knowledge of him. Everything we need is contained in knowing God. And I want you also to notice this, that he talks about being able to escape the corruption that is in the world. That's exactly what Noah was trying to do. That is exactly what Noah was able to do. He was able to escape the corruption that was in the world of his day because he listened to the voice of God and he learned everything that God had provided to him and he put it into action. Now, the tools that we need to avoid Satan's tactics, the tools that we need to avoid temptation, to escape from the corruption that's in this world, it is all found in Scripture. It is all found in the knowledge of God. And as Peter talks about here, as we come to know God better, we can even become sharers or partakers in the divine nature. We become more and more like God along the way. And Peter actually goes into that in more detail, with some of the Christian graces that he mentions in the next several verses, but we're not going to go into that. We're going to go back to Genesis chapter 6. Now, there's no application point for this, but I thought it might be interesting for you to know, because I've always wondered, it talks in verse 14 about make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. And most translations will say gopher wood. The King James, New King James, New American Standard, all just say gopher. Gopher there is not the creature you try to kill in your backyard. It's not. It's a transliteration, they put into English letters, of the Hebrew word gopher. So it's gopher wood, not gopher wood. And they do that because they don't know exactly what type of wood this is. But I was curious whether or not they'd maybe done some more research and gotten closer to knowing. Apparently, the word is related to the words for resin or, the aromatic resins that you get from cedars. And so the prevailing theory is that this is talking about some kind of cedar or cypress wood, and it's just a word that's fallen out of usage in Hebrew. Not necessarily some extinct tree that we don't have, but some kind of really sturdy wood. And that's what's interesting here too, is God tells him exactly the type of wood to use. He tells him how to build the boat so that water doesn't come in. He tells him how to seal it. He gives him the dimensions for it. These are very accurate dimensions for a seaworthy vessel in a very similar Babylonian myth. The Babylonians had a flood myth, but in their flood myth, the ark was a cube. I've never seen a boat that worked very well as a cube. But notice that God knows how to make a boat. I don't know that Noah had ever built a boat before. There's a lot of things that we might not know how to do. We don't have to know because God knows. And he teaches us. And he gives us the details. Things that later on in life we might look back and think, that was really wise. That was God's plan is surprisingly good. It really works out sometimes. And it might not be something that we'd come up with on our own, but it is wise and it is good. And only when we learn to trust in it are we going to have that same level of wisdom. And that wisdom doesn't come because we have, acceded to the level of wisdom that God has, but because we trust in his knowledge. And that's what Noah is willing to do. He is willing to be humble and to accept God's wisdom and knowledge over his own. If we want to be like Noah, we have to listen to God, even when it doesn't make sense. Now I want you to look down at verse 18. In the middle of all these instructions, talking about building the ark, and then before he talks about all the animals that go in the ark, God includes this. He says, but I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall enter the ark, you and your sons, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. This is the first time in Scripture that this word covenant is ever used. So when we come across it, we don't really have any context for what it means. I don't know if Noah has a context of knowing what it means. I don't know if he has a concept of what is being promised to him. I have no idea. Because we haven't read about anyone so far that God has formed a covenant with. What does a covenant, an agreement, a contract look like between God and man? We have no idea. We've never seen one of these before. At least so far in the book of Genesis, right? Now, it doesn't go into any detail here. It doesn't tell us what that covenant is going to be. It doesn't tell us what that's going to require of Noah or what God really is promising to do. Just that he's going to form some covenant, some kind of special relationship with Noah. That's probably all he knows at this point. Now, in chapter 9, God is going to come back and he's going to make that covenant and he's going to explain it. And we'll study about that more when we get to chapter 9. But here, we really don't have any details. But Noah takes it to heart. Noah receives this promise from God, and whatever it may mean to him, whatever he may understand about it, he takes it to heart, and he gets to work. Now, obviously, part of the promise that God is making to Noah is you're not going to die in the flood, which is a splendid promise in Noah's eyes, I'm sure. That's probably sufficient to Noah. I doubt he expects anything beyond that. He's probably happy to just not die, right? But God offers him even more. And he takes that promise and he trusts in it. And I believe this is part of what the Hebrews writer is going to bring up later on in Hebrews chapter 11. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. Verse 7 says, "By faith Noah, being warned about things not yet seen," being warned about the flood, "in reverence to God, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith." Now, you just read that verse, and all you have is a picture of a man who knew that there was going to be destruction. God told him to build an ark, and he said, "I'll do that." But if you read it with the previous verse, Hebrews 11, verse 6, which says, "Without faith it is impossible to please him," God, "for he who draws near to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him." It's not just that God spared Noah's life. God extends his grace, his favor toward Noah in making this promise to him of this covenant. And Noah, he's warned and he obeys. There's an element of fear there, but he also trusts in these promises that God makes to him. And for the next however many years it is before the flood actually comes, he has those promises to come back to lean on, and to trust in as motivation. Now, God has made us promises too. Do we trust in God's promises? Do we lean on them? Do we think about them? Here's one of those promises. This is 1 Corinthians 15, 53 and 54. I want you to listen to this. "For this corruptible," talking about our body, "this corruptible must put on the incorruptible, and this mortal must put on immortality. But when this corruptible puts on the incorruptible, and this mortal puts on immortality, then will come about the word that is written, death is swallowed up in victory." Now, I chose that particular one because it brings out, again, this concept of corruption. Satan is able to tempt us, as we saw, because of our flesh, because of our bodies being the way that they are. But God has made a promise to us, not only that he will redeem us in a spiritual sense, that he will free us from the corruption of sin, but he has also made a promise to free us from the corruption of this body. Free us from the corruption and the decay that we can suffer, and replace these bodies with a version that is not corruptible, a version that Satan cannot tempt, a version which cannot even sin. He makes that promise for us. We have that to look forward to. We can place that as a goal in our minds to remember when we come into temptation, when we're struggling, when we're trying to hold on. We have those, as Peter described them, those exceedingly great and precious promises that God has made for us, not just out of some kind of obligation or as a carrot for us, but promises God has made for us because he means them, because he loves us. Trust in God's promises if you want to be like Noah. And of course, the final verse in this chapter, verse 22, in very simple words, "Thus Noah did, according to all that God had commanded him so Noah did. It tells us that Noah obeyed God. And in case you missed it, it says it a second time. Noah obeyed God. And he didn't just obey God in some things. He didn't build an ark, but, instead of coating it on the inside and the outside with pitch, just do the outside. Maybe you could get away with just doing it on the outside. It would be nice to have more light instead of making this row of windows at the top. Instead of making it 1 cubit high, what if you made it like a cubit and a half? Just get some extra light in there, right? No, he follows all of those details. There's really not that many details here, but he follows all of them. And we have details that have been recorded for us. We have all of this for us to follow. And of course, not all of this is explicit commands. Not all of it is, directions with precise values and cubits and measurements to try to keep up with. But we do have some details in Scripture. We have details about our worship. We have details about our life. We have details about how our family should be structured and how the church should be structured. And if we want to be like Noah, we have to follow those details. We have to take them to heart and to believe and obey in them the same way Noah did. It is because of Noah's obedience, not simply his trust, but the way his faith played out. He proves his faith and his trust in God by his actions. Now, Noah has a limited window in which he can obey. I mentioned this morning that up in verse 3, it says, nevertheless his days shall be 120 years. God at that point sets a countdown, a clock, 120 years until the flood is going to come. Now, when exactly along the way does God talk to Noah? It kind of sounds like he talks to him right at the beginning of it, at the beginning of the 120 years. And that's possible. But at the beginning of those 120 years, Noah's sons have not yet been born. Noah's sons are not born. His oldest son, Japheth, is not born until Abraham. I don't know, I said Abraham. His oldest son, Japheth, is not born until Noah is 500 years old. That's 100 years before the flood. And his next son, Shem, isn't born for another 2 years. Ham is born sometime after that. So it's possible that when God speaks to him, because God mentions, you shall go in, you and your wife and your sons wives. It's possible that God tells him this before he even has sons, and then Noah, in obedience, has sons and gets them wives. Or it's possible that those sons have already been born and already been married. In which case, he doesn't have 120 years to build this ark. He has something like 50 to 75 years. A much shorter period of time. Either way, I don't know which is the case. I really have no idea. I lean toward the first. But either way, this is not a weekend project that God gives him to do. This is an insane task. Not only to build the outside. You remember, he has to go through and build all the rooms. He has to make sure that the light has access to all of those rooms. He has to make sure that there's feed for all the animals in each of those rooms. That's a lot of work. A lot more than just building a giant box, right? I mean, there's a lot to this. Noah doesn't have time to sit around. He needs to get to work, and he does. And he completes it within this time. Now, as I mentioned this morning, I'll mention again now, Noah gets some kind of a countdown. Whether that countdown was 50 years, 75 years, or 120 years. He gets some kind of countdown and we don't. We don't know. Our countdown is a lot closer to 50 years or 70 years. God has given us things to do, and we have to do them. If we're going to be like Noah, if we're going to stand out in this world, if we're going to stand tall and resilient against the corruption of Satan, if we want to be different in the way that Noah was so different that no one else in the entire world looked like him, and he was the only one counted faithful, if we want to be righteous like that, we have to take what God says to heart. His commands, his promises, and his instructions. I leave y'all with the lesson at this point. And I want you to notice that Noah does not come back to God and ask him to explain the details or ask him why those measurements. Instead, he accepts them. We have to be like that too. Sometimes instead, we wait until we have a better understanding or a deeper understanding to get to work. Let's not be like that. Let's get to work right now because we love the Lord. If you have any need, please come while we stand and sing.